welcome to another episode of Byzantium and Friends. I am Anthony, your host. In past episodes, we've occasionally discussed the state of Byzantium in popular media, and we've generally found that it's not that good. Now, I should say that there are actually very many historical novels about Byzantium, and many of them are quite good, and then they tend to cluster in the early Byzantine period. There's a bit of a lag for the Middle Byzantine period, unless we're talking about Vikings and Varangians, because some of the novels about those kind of become Byzantine novels along the course of the hero's adventures. Then there's a whole other cluster around the fall of Constantinople, 1453, and that whole period. When it comes to movies and TV shows, we're not that well served. We're still waiting for the Byzantine Game of Thrones version or any kind of Hollywood production that isn't just a caricature. So maybe we should wait for those until perceptions shift and we get something better. So one area that I didn't know was active was the comic book world until a few months ago when I received, out of the blue, the proofs for a graphic novel about Byzantium in the 10th century. Its creators asked me to check on some things, and I was very impressed by the storytelling and the visual style. And so to punish the creators for their intrusion on my time, I thought I would drag them onto the podcast and have them explain themselves to you. They are Spyros Theocharis, who wrote the story, and Chrysa Sakel, who did the art. She also goes by Chrysa Sakel. And the story is called Theophano, a Byzantine Tale. You can find it on Amazon. I found it very well done from both a historical and storytelling aspect. I should tell you what it's about. This is not Theophano, the niece of the Emperor Ioannis Tzimisces, who married Otto II, the German emperor, in the West, and moved to the West, and her son was Otto III. And that Theophano, who is often discussed as a transmitter of Byzantine culture to the West, as a different person. This novel is about her contemporary Theophano, who was the wife, empress of Romanos II, and therefore the mother of Basil II, the Bulgar slayer, and his brother Constantine VIII. This Theophano appears very prominently in the historical texts of the mid to later 10th century. And depending on which texts you believe, she was either this very beautiful woman of humble origin, like a barmaid who maneuvered her way up in the palace intrigue and was responsible for the murder of a number of emperors, including her father-in-law, possibly her husband, and conspiring with Tzimisces to arrange for the murder of Nikephoros Phokas, whom she had married. It's just a very complicated tale. Or else she did none of those things. She was a perfectly innocent bystander who was frequently blamed and scapegoated in all the maneuverings that all the men around her were engaging in. And occasionally someone had to be blamed, and she was frequently blamed. I think she took the fall for the murder of Phokas. Tzimisces had to atone in some way, and out she went. Anyway, this is a very interesting period, and it offers a lot of scope for both historical inquiry and imaginative reconstruction. And that is exactly what Spyros and Chrysa have done. Now, they are not Byzantinists, but they did study the sources and the scholarship, and I thought it'd be interesting to get them onto the podcast and get their perspective. In part because moving forward, if we want to see Byzantium represented in more popular media, scholars and artists and creative writers are going to have to work together in order to produce the best results for our field and for the civilization that we're so interested in. I was interested in what drew them to this topic and this period, and also in their artistic choices. So I should say that I don't commonly read comic books or graphic novels, but when I started flipping through this, I just found myself reading it all the way to the end in one go. So it was pretty engaging. So, whether you're into this medium or not, I encourage you to check it out, especially now that their work is available on Amazon and some other places that Spyros explains at the end of the interview. This podcast is also available on medievalist.net. I encourage you to check out that site for more medieval content. And so without any further delay, here is my conversation with Spyros and Chrysa. Hello, Spyro and Chrysa. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
Hello.
Let's just jump right into it. You have produced the first of a kind that I've ever seen, which is a graphic novel about Byzantine history. And we'll talk later about your design priorities and storytelling interests and so forth. But let me just ask you first, what was your background in narrative storytelling or graphic design that enabled you to produce this wonderful tale?
First of all, before beginning, thank you for having us in your podcast. We feel especially honored to be invited here because we are not academics and we don't have any degree related to the field of Byzantine studies.
That's perfect.
My name is Spyros Theocharis. I know Greek names are usually difficult to pronounce. I am the writer of the graphic novel Theophano. Specifically, I wrote the dialogues in the story, and I also made most of the historical research regarding Theophano. I was born in Athens, Greece, and it's there that I also studied English language and literature at the Kapodistrian University of Athens. And I work as a tutor of English. I have an experience in writing through my years at the university, as I have read a lot of literary books. And I am also a comic book fan. I own a big collection of comic books.
What kind of comic books?
Mainly superhero comic books from the years that I was younger. But I also now have started collecting some graphic novels, which is a more serious genre, I could say.
Right. So you're expecting the movie rights to... as part of the MCU, maybe? Or...
Perhaps, maybe someday if interest in the Byzantine history increases or something like that.
Right. Okay, that'll be a later episode about Byzantine superheroes. Okay. Yeah, Chrysa.
Hello. I would like to say that I'm also very, very happy to meet you and talk to you. My name is Chrysa Sakel, and it is also a big name, so I use the shortened version Chrysa Sakel for the graphic novel. I'm also born in Greece, and from a very young age, I started painting and classes in traditional art. And I have been focusing more on traditional art the previous years, but right now I want to transition to digital art and comic art. And this is my first attempt. It's the first graphic novel that I'm creating. So my cooperation with Spyros brought me to this journey.
So you had never imagined that your first graphic novel would be about Byzantium?
No way. No. I was very biased about that era, actually.
Really? So if someone had told you 5 years ago that you would spend, a good part of, I don't know how long it took you, but it would be about Byzantium, you would have said no. That's
no idea. Actually, I really like the medieval theme and the tales and maybe the medieval fantasy. But Byzantium, no, I had no idea actually what it was. I had no idea what to expect when drawing, about it.
So what brought you to create a graphic novel about Byzantium?
It was my cooperation with Spyros, 100%. I would never do it if it wasn't for him.
Okay, so we'll blame him.
Yes.
So Spyro, what brought you to Byzantium?
Well, except for the fact that I am a comic book fan, I really like reading about history. And one of my favorite periods of history is the Byzantine Empire. So having read a lot of books about the history of the Byzantine Empire, I wondered at some point, I'm not the only one who has thought of that, why there is nothing related to the Byzantines in what we call pop culture. When I say pop culture, I mean movies, TV series, or even graphic novels. And I'm sure that stories like the ones of Emperor Justinian or Irene of Athens would be really interesting, even to those who don't know much about Byzantium, because of the plot, the intrigue, and all these things that happens to these protagonists.
Why do you think that Byzantium is absent from these kinds of media of popular culture?
That's a quite complicated matter. I don't think that I am specialized to answer that, but in my own opinion, I think that it has to do with a widespread ignorance and misunderstanding regarding Byzantium itself. As we know, the name Byzantium was never used actually by the people who lived during that time. And many people don't actually know that Byzantium was actually the continuation of the ancient Roman Empire. And if that became more known to the people, I think this would increase the interest towards this era.
Yeah, because ancient Rome is definitely well represented in popular culture all over the place. But it's often represented indirectly as a kind of template for imagining stories, like Star Wars, for example, right? The whole transition from republic to empire is just a straight up Roman story. The interesting thing about Byzantium is that it is used sometimes in that way. It just also remains kind of invisible, sort of behind the scenes. So, I mean, you're right. It's not represented, and also it lacks the kind of sort of fantasy dimension that the medieval West sometimes has, right? Like, it doesn't have that kind of mythology. It doesn't have things like, monsters, and I mean, at least not very prominently. It has theology, and that does not lend itself to popular culture. So if you think about like Tolkien, right? The Kingdom of Gondor, that's modeled on Byzantium. Yeah, even in the movies it was.
Now that you mentioned Tolkien, I have read somewhere that he actually was inspired by Byzantine history when he wrote the third book. There's a similarity between some occurrences in the Return of the King, where, I hope the listeners know when the kingdom of Rohan actually intervenes and in the last moment saves the capital city of Gondor, Minas Tirith. This is actually similar to something that happened in Byzantine history when Bulgarian Khan, King Tervel, actually saved Constantinople during the siege of Constantinople. I don't remember actually when these sieges happened, but I remember that a Bulgarian Khan saved the city during the siege by the Arabs.
Yeah, early 8th century.
Oh, 8th century, yes.
Oh, yes. And even the Dark Speech of Mordor, Tolkien based that on Turkish, yeah.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah. But again, those templates are kind of hidden. So, I mean, that's why we're talking about them. Otherwise, they would be too obvious. Chrysa, did you want to add to this?
I wanted to discuss the question you asked to Spyros, because I have a lot to say as someone who used to represent the majority of Greeks my age. Before I met Spyros, I had no idea about Byzantium and the Byzantine era. My knowledge was very poor, and it only consisted of some things I still remembered from high school. I think that it's not a very popular era because people are biased towards that time, and they associate it with extreme religiosity and some boring classes they had during high school. And everyone you meet in the street and you try to talk about that time, they are always reacting in a way like, oh, this is kind of boring. This is a matter that a nerd would discuss. And most people don't know many things, many very interesting things and very impressive things about Byzantium. And actually, me, myself, when I encountered these things in the texts we read about the timeline we were creating in the graphic novel, I was very, very impressed, and my view of that time completely changed.
Right. I mean, if, as you say, you approach someone on the street in Greece and ask them about Byzantium, they'll think, you're you're trying to,
Here.
yes, yeah, there's something either in the church, you're trying to get them to join a monastery or some,
Exactly.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes, Peter.
I would like to add to that that it's quite ironic to say, and a lot of people don't know that, but a lot of people have are how to say have an ignorance about Byzantine history, or they mislearn it during their school years. So, as Chrysa said, they associate it mostly with theology or theological matters or Christianity, and not with the history itself and the culture, which is actually present right now in the modern Greek society, beginning from the traditional dances, from continuing to music, or even to daily speech. We still use some phrases which are inherited from the Byzantine era.
I think that it's a problem of imagination, really, and this is why it's so interesting to talk to you, because you've made that leap, from what is commonly known or not known generally in about Byzantium in Greece, or that you learned from in school, to imagining it in a very different way, as you have in a graphic novel, as an imperial culture. It's an imperial version of sort of vernacular medieval Orthodox culture. And this is very difficult to do because the Ottoman conquest basically decapitated all of the sort of political elites and the whole imperial side of Byzantine civilization, leaving only what was happening locally, more or less. And so, Greeks can associate Byzantium with folk traditions, going to church, your local monastery, things, vernacular speech, but they don't have in their mind an image of that culture in its imperial form. And that's what you represent very vividly, right, in the novel. And it gives it a very different dimension, which it's lacking. And I think the failure to visualize it that way, that it's being kept as a vernacular rather than an imperial high culture, I think that's the biggest leap to make.
That's why I mentioned before pop culture, because pop culture has to do mainly with visual representation of things. Even music now has video clips, and everything has to do with things that we see. A graphic novel was the best that we could do, at least, because we are not filmmakers, to represent an era and try to attract an audience which does not entirely understand Byzantium, or doesn't have time to read about it, because it's 1,000 years of story that I don't know that someone has the patience to do that, to start from the beginning in order to be able to understand it.
I wanted to get to the visualization aspects a bit later on, but first let me ask you, why did you choose this particular period? So your novel is set in the mid to later 10th century, mostly in Constantinople. So why did you choose that period and that set of characters and the story?
Because I think that this period has the best possible representation of the medieval Romans and the medieval Roman Empire to the general audience. It is an era where the main pillars of identity of the Romans are indisputably the dominant elements of the Byzantine world, like, for example, the Greek language, the Orthodox faith, and the Roman identity and culture. So I thought of presenting something that is glorious, or something that shows that the Byzantine Empire was on the rise and not on the decline, because most people associate it with an era of decline, of corruption, and generally with a lot of negative thoughts about it.
Yeah,
so that's why
point.
I chose the 10th century Byzantine Empire, because of this golden era of the Macedonian dynasty.
Yeah, and what drew you to these characters in particular?
It depends on which characters.
Well, your protagonist is Theophano.
Yes, let me start with the protagonist, with Theophano. Yeah. She's a character that is not well known as other historical characters that I mentioned before, like, for example, Justinian or Empress Theodora, or I even thought of creating a story about Alexios Komnenos, who is pretty famous as a character. We wanted our readers to be unbiased while reading the story. And as I said before, there are a lot of negative concepts, such as extreme religiosity or backwardness regarding Byzantium. And I believe that these can be overturned with Theophano's story, as this story resembles nothing of what someone could expect from a life of a woman who lived during the medieval times. Because Theophano as a character is a strong female character who dealt with three different and I could say powerful emperors. And generally, her actions changed the course of history and also ensured the continuation of the Macedonian dynasty through the famous Emperor Basil II, who, as we know, was named the Bulgar Slayer.
What I wanted to say about the way you wrote the story is that it's actually very difficult to do that with a medieval woman, just like you said, because the medieval sources don't help us. So for them, women are either absolutely virtuous saints who, by virtue of being saintly, you never hear from, and like they're supposed to be quiet or, be modest wives or whatever, and not see them or hear them, or they're monsters, right? Who are full of vice and all of this. And there simply isn't really a narrative template for a strong woman who's negotiating all the dangers of living in the palace as she did. And I think this is what you show very well. So finding your own way, your own storytelling way of getting around those two extremes. And so I thought that was well done.
Thank you about that.
So Chrysa, what drew you to these characters at this time?
When we tried to choose the topic and the characters, I started by saying that I wanted the main character to be female, for sure. I wanted it to be a strong woman because I may not know a lot about Byzantium, but I know that there were some really significant women that passed through all these years and lived, their stories still are worth telling. The thing that Spyros mentioned, the fact that she's not a very popular character and her story is not very well known, is a major factor that made her story very attractive, because it allowed us to sort of change some parts of history here and there and create a final plot that it catches the reader's attention. And it is also easy to understand. We wanted to approach the younger audience, the people who don't know a lot about that time, and we wanted to keep their attention throughout the whole story, and not make them feel like they're reading a history book or something coming, from their school years. So yes, that's what we wanted. We wanted to bring those characters to life in the pages of the graphic novel. And I think each of them has a very interesting story and a very interesting character. There's not like the bad one and the good one. They all have their reasons. And for me, it was very interesting to get to know them throughout our research.
Yes, especially that cast of characters, Nikiforos Fokas and Simiskis and Theophano and all of these people, and the eunuchs at the court that you have in there. They have multiple roles, and their motivations and alliances certainly did not stay fixed during your book covers what, like 35 years, something like that.
Something like that, yes.
And they shifted in their alliances quite a bit. And it's interesting what you say about school. Like, honestly, as an educator and a scholar, I think it would be better for students in schools to be exposed to Byzantine history through a text like what you've written than from the textbooks that are sometimes used.
Yes.
No, I mean, like, seriously, I think that is just in terms of activating the imagination and getting people interested. I think that what you've done works so much better. You can have discussions about it. You can, someone could contest the historical accuracy of this or that thing, but that doesn't matter. Like, who really cares, getting it all right for the purpose of instructing school children? The point is to give them something visually stimulating that will stay with them.
Yeah, we didn't want to create something historically accurate because we were not able to do that. If, for example, Chrysa agreed to make it, for example, something like 500 pages, maybe it would become historically accurate. But, the process of creating even one page is really arduous. So I was happy even with that, even with this fictional story that created, but it doesn't actually, it is not actually so inaccurate.
No.
If you compare it to the primary sources, which themselves, better than us. Actually, they produce some, I could say, controversial views over Theophano.
Sure.
And I would also like also to add about the characters that, for me, as an admirer of Byzantine history, I was really happy to work with characters such as Nikiforos Fokas and John Tsimiskis or Constantine Porphyrogenitos, because they are actually very famous characters, and that's also one of the reasons why we chose Theophano, because she's a character who interacted with all of these famous characters.
Yeah. So Chrysa, let me ask you, so as an illustrator, as a graphic artist, what appealed to you most about representing this culture? Like, you were thinking, okay, if we're going to tell a story about Byzantium, I'm definitely going to include what? Like, what were you most looking for? Or what did you enjoy doing most now that you've done it?
Well, I think that the most impressive parts of the graphic novel is the architecture, in some parts, and some others the interior design, although this is not my favorite, because I'm not very fond of architectural designs, and they were very difficult to design. But when I first started, there was not one particular thing that I was thinking that, wow, I'm going to draw this, because, as I said, I had no idea what to expect. I knew that I had to draw like a very intriguing character and develop like Theophano from a very young age, and finally make her become like the strong, mature woman that she was during the final chapters. But I think that, well, as most of us know, that the part of Byzantium that we feel connected as Greeks is Hagia Sophia. And this is what was very impressive for me to draw, because with Spyros we had the chance, thankfully, to visit Hagia Sophia before it was turned into a mosque. And we actually made a lot of research about its interior and what it looked like back then. So my view also changed, because I thought that by drawing Hagia Sophia, I was going to draw like another Orthodox church like the ones you see here in Greece. But by visiting that massive building and reading about the interior design, I soon realized that it was nothing like I have ever imagined. And it was so famous for a reason. I mean, it used to be very impressive. And I wanted to depict that. I was very, I wanted to bring the glory to this building.
Tell me about the color purple.
The color purple. We use the word porphyry in everyday speaking Greek. This word still exists as a color. I just didn't know it was coming from Byzantium and from that specific material they used. Spyros told me about it, of course, and I read also a lot about it. So I made it the main color theme in the book. It was the only choice I had, and I think I shouldn't have used any other color. Yeah, it's the color that decorated all the clothes and the personal items of the emperor. It was the imperial color of the kings and queens. And also there was one part where we drew the porphyry room, the purple room.
Yes.
And which it was something I didn't know that existed. It was supposed to be completely decorated in porphyry stone and was completely red, and all the purple-born emperors were born there. So that's an information I didn't know about. But I was glad to draw it. I was very happy to know about it.
It's difficult to talk about that color in English because we don't really have the word porphyry unless you're talking about a particular quarry in Egypt that produced porphyry stone. But purple is not exactly, we're not exactly talking about purple. And so it's difficult sometimes to even translate when you come across it. It's neither red nor purple exactly. But
I think historically also the Byzantines, they didn't mean one specific color. I don't know where I heard that, but by saying porphyry, Byzantines meant like the full range of deep red and purple, I think.
Yeah, it depends on the material you're using. But I mean, let me just say, you did a fantastic job with it. I mean, the color in this volume it's lush. It really is. It's luxuriant and it's very strong, and it's exactly what is appropriate for, I think, the jewelry. And I mean, you really went all out in representing all of that. Like, you couldn't put too many, precious stones on something in Byzantium.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
I didn't know much about the fashion of the history, but I definitely knew that it was lavish and extravagant. I knew that for sure. And I knew that there were, like you said, not enough stones and jewels in the clothes. Yeah. I could put as much as I wanted, and it would never be enough.
So tell me a detail that you had fun with, just some little detail that you thought, I got to add this in, or, a choice that you made in maybe even in just one panel.
Oh, there are a lot of details that were added, like cheeky little details that we wanted to treat the Byzantine lovers with. The one that was my favorite one is the wall painting that was depicted when in the chapter where Theophano escorts Nicephoros Phokas to Cappadocia. And there is one little picture where she looks at the wall and there's a wall painting there, and where she stands next to Nicephoros Phokas. And we actually stumbled across this information while reading about her and her story, that there is actually this wall painting that still exists in a village in Cappadocia. And you can go see it, and it is in a church, the Church of Nicephoros Phokas, I think it's called, something like this. And we wanted to add like this small detail that many readers might not notice it if they don't know about it.
Yeah. So what I want to draw our audience attention to is that what you're doing is something difficult that most scholars can usually get away with not doing. And I mean it in the following way. When you're writing a historical novel, but for example, that's a different kind of imagining things that, how they might have happened that one normally doesn't find in historical sources. But especially when you're trying to visualize this culture, as you were doing, you have to make decisions. Also, you at some point, you're just going to have to decide, this is how it was. This is what this thing looked like. This is how these people moved and behaved. And like, are they standing close to each other? Are they super formal with each other? These are things that, like my crowd can just avoid because like we don't really know, or their clothes. Like there's so much about Byzantine clothing, right? That we know the names. We don't know exactly what these things are. We don't know if they wore underwear. We don't know. But you have to make a decision about it. Like ultimately, how do you think it? I remember once I spoke with Peter Green. Now, Peter Green was a classicist. He was at the University of Iowa for a long time, but he also wrote some novels about antiquity. He wrote a novel about Alcibiades, and he wrote one about Sappho, and that was his best one, and so on. And he told me that he thought it was historians' responsibility at some point to write a historical novel because it would force them to come down somewhere on how life was like, what life was like. You just jump straight to that, but that's difficult, making those kinds of decisions because, the evidence is so problematic. Let's go back to the story a little bit. So what kind of a person do you want your readers to think Theophano was? Or rather, what kinds of issues was she wrestling with that you think deserve, more discussion and for people to read this novel?
Theophano is mostly known about her involvement in the conspiracy against Nikiforos Phokas. This is, I think, the most famous moment where she was involved in. She's a historical personality who, as I said before, is a bit controversial among the historians, the chronographers of the primary sources, because she's accused of being involved in more murders, I could say.
Lots of murders.
Yes, in lots of murders. I'm trying not to give up, spoilers from the graphic novel. Nobody knows if she was actually involved in these conspiracies.
Of course not. They're like it's allegations of poisoning. Like, how can you can't know these things, much less 1,000 years later.
Yeah, but for me, it was really intriguing as a writer. When I read all these things, I imagined the story out of it, of a person who was either involved or indirectly involved, or, she did these things because she had her own reasons to do. So that's what I tried to create, a character who, a reader may see her actions and may interpret them according to their own morality, I could say. For example, one reader may say that what she did was actually something heinous, or some other may say that, okay, this is justifiable. Although the primary sources, as I said, provide contradicting information, I tried to get the most intriguing parts from all of them. Yes, it's true that there is a pattern, as you say, about a beautiful woman whom I would characterize as a femme fatale or a black widow, whose appearance lead her to do some things that are considered immoral or even not accepted by the society during that time. And I believe that the chronographers actually are based on that. They also created the story based on these aspects of Theophano, which concern her beauty and her low-born descent, which is also one thing that it's controversial among the chronographers again.
Right.
Just to mention, some chronographers say that she was actually a noble born. Some others say that she was just a common girl, a daughter of a tavern owner from Sparta.
So about Theophano, a historian could reasonably conclude that we actually don't know anything about her and that all of these evil actions are made up and everything she was scapegoated a couple of times for other people, for men's interests. She was thrown out of the palace and things like this. Or one can take everything at face value and say, we know quite a bit about her, and it's not all flattering. And, you tried to put her in a situation where her actions sort of made sense and, from her standpoint, and she's not either too evil or she's not a complete cipher. And I think that's very important. Okay, Chrysa, let me ask you one more question. So just as a curiosity, can you tell us the process by which you illustrated something that we know about only from a text? So something that's not like a Sophia that you can visit and sort of visualize, but something that's referred to in a text that is, that offers some room for interpretation, and you had to decide, okay, I'm going to do it this way.
Yeah, like you mentioned, my job was more difficult than some historian who would talk about that era and intentionally avoid some subjects that they don't know exactly what they're talking about. And actually, we encountered that while reading through texts and bibliography, because there were some words, let's say, that were mentioned, for example, like the clothing and the layers of and pieces of its fabric and clothes, that they were mentioned, for example, saying a word like didakion or loron, but nobody really explained what they actually were. They knew that in a certain ceremony, the emperor would wear this or that, but they didn't explain it very well. So I had to deal with all these inaccuracies. I had to imagine like a general style and character of that era and use it like consistently throughout the comic. I was very much inspired by ancient Roman architecture and interior designs, patterns from mosaics of that time, and also with an element of the Orthodox religion, and of course the extravagance. I knew that they were very rich. They would like to add on anything design-wise, add different elements and textures like wood with marble and with jewels, and put one on top of the other, and think that the more extravagant something is, the more powerful it looks, although sometimes it might look a bit quiche. I don't know if there's another word for that. When I started drawing all these patterns and interior designs, I just had some things in mind as someone who's not very familiar with that time. But I had in mind the double-headed eagle, and I also had in mind some mosaics from Hagia Sophia that are everywhere around the internet. And then as we read through the history, I realized that these things didn't exist back then, and it would be a very easy way out for me to just decorate a banner or a background with a double-headed eagle, but that wasn't the choice I had. So yeah, I had to go through a lot of reference images I could find on the internet. I think coins really helped me, like the coins of that time that depicted the crowns and the clothes. And of course, pictures from other artists on the internet. And all this combination resulted in the final result. That it's my view, at least. And I think it's a little accurate, not 100%, but okay. I think it's as accurate as I can get.
I would like to add that we had a really big problem with symbols, because while we read through the primary sources, we didn't find any definite answers towards our questions. So we mostly use the hero symbol, which is Constantine the Great's symbol, and also at some points we also use the aquila, the ancient Roman aquila, the one-headed eagle.
Quite right. So where can our listeners find this book?
Right now, the book is available on Amazon.com. I would like also to point out for some readers that they could also find it on their local Amazon sites in order to save shipping costs. It's also available as an ebook, as a Kindle ebook on Amazon. And also, as we're speaking today, it is also available on Comixology.com. Most comic book fans actually know about this site. It's a site that is centered on comic books. In the near future, we hope that we can actually make it available on shelves of bookstores. We're trying to find a distribution partner.
Yeah, so the version that you sent me was in English, and you say you're planning a Greek version as well?
Yes, we are really trying to fight the Greek bureaucracy first, because we are trying to fight the Greek bureaucracy.
No, I heard you.
Because just like the Roman bureaucracy, it's still very complicated. So
wait, why where does the Greek bureaucracy come in?
It comes in with the ISBN because in order to create an ISBN, you have to address the National Library of Greece. So this is where Greek bureaucracy comes in, and it needs some kind of process in order to publish it. It will take some time in order to have the Greek version
Sure.
complete and be able to publish it.
Good luck. I won't use the word
Thank you
Byzantine. Good luck. All right, and last question. So what's next for you?
I think we are discussing many plots. Of course, there are a lot of interesting stories in the Byzantine history. I think if this goes well and we see that the public is really interested in the Byzantine era, we want to continue maybe making a sequel or prequel. There are many, many interesting stories. Or else maybe other medieval stories that we can find. It's up to, the audience's opinion.
Yeah, if you want to increase sales, I mean, what a publisher will tell you these days is that it has to be about the Crusades.
Yes, of course.
We thought about it.
It's my dream to someday, visualize the Alexiad. But it's it's a grand story, and it's up to Chrysa if she will accept this project.
Yes.
Yeah. No,
he will lock me down the basement to draw all day.
Good. Well, Chrysa, Spyros, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure to read your
I
work.
would also want to say to you, a special thank you for inviting us, and we didn't thank you enough for the blurb you wrote.
No, my pleasure.
Yes.
My pleasure.
And I would also like to add too, sorry, because I forgot that before. I really got a lot of inspiration for my graphic novel from your book, Roman Land. It actually clarifies a lot of things about the identity of the Byzantines. So I really needed to mention that to you.
Thanks. So the audience can blame me now. All right. That's fine. I'll take it. All right. Thank you both. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.